This is always the tense bit. We all wait for Facebook to load. Just about done. There we go. Over to you, Mark, to open.
Thank you, Cassandra. Well, the good news, by the way, is that the Fiat started.
Hooray! I was thinking I'd have to like speak in different languages and like jump around and put glasses on and play more than one part. So that's good news. Yay, the Fiat.
It's an inside joke, but we'll get to the main theme of things. We're delighted today to have the Red Wheelbarrow Poets reading for us, including Claudia Serea, J Trause, Anton, Yakovlev, and Arthur Russell. We're delighted to have them. And before we get started with the feature today, let me introduce my co-host, Cassandra Atherton, who's an award-winning prose poet and international expert on prose poetry. Cassandra's prose poetry is widely anthologized and has been translated into Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. Cassandra has published more than 30 books and is currently writing an illustrated book of prose poetry on the Hiroshima Maidens, with funding from the Australia Council and the Victorian government. Cassandra also co-wrote Prose Poetry and Introduction and co-edited the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry. She is commissioning editor for Wesley magazine and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia.
Hello, thank you so much for that. And it's no surprise I'm going to read a prose poem. So this one was just published in a feminist anthology here in Australia. And I thought it was quite fitting because Mark has written a poem recently on volcans and volcanoes. And this one's about a volcano. So it's quite a short prose poem. In the cooling aftermath, I become glassy rock. My fingers covering the last place you kissed me, sparing it from destruction. Once I occupied the spaces between your ribs, dwelt in the thick absences between embraces, but broken language ignited a fire that marched beneath my skin. I am more than your pilot light. I am subtle as a volcano. When you find me, there's a pocket of hot air beneath my igneous palm. So I would like to introduce Mark Vincenz, who is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published over 30 books of poetry, translations, and fiction, including more recently 39 Wonders and Other Management Issues, The Pearl Diver of Irunmani with White Pine Press, A Splash of Cave Paint with Spite and Dival, and a chapbook, An Alphabet of Last Rites with Chavina Bava. The King of Prussia is Drunk on Stars is forthcoming in 2024 in January from Lavender Ink. Mark is also, as our regulars know, a prolific translator and has translated from German, Romanian, and French. He's published 11 books of translations, most recently an Audible Blue, Selected Poems 1963 to 2016 by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Mertz, which just won the 2023 Massachusetts Book Prize for Translated Literature. His own work has been translated into many languages, including Japanese, Chinese, Russian, French, Italian, Romanian, Greek, German, and Icelandic. He is currently working on a novel entitled The Age of Occasions. Vincenz is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived, joined in regulars all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, Melville's inspiration for Moby Dick, where there are more, drumroll, red-spotted newts, red-bellied cooters, and spade-foot toads than people. Mark, I should have worn my red flower with all those red critters, but you'll forgive me. Will you read for us, please?
I shall. I'm going to read one of your favorites, actually. Just recently composed this one. And it's in my manuscript that I'm working on called Spells for the Wicked. And it's called V for Vulcan, Vincenz, and Vesuvius. My old man praised himself for not being like his own old pa, but striking out to the furthest shores from his home, a mildly coniferous alpine village sauteed in pristine sunlight and chanterelle mushrooms, where the jangle of the cowbells foretell snowstorms, and the ghosts of Huns and Romans walked the forest in the bewitching hours. At the age of 19, he made off to the city and sold exclusive ladies' shoes door to door. He would barrel down the slick cobbled alleys of Zurich's old town, suitcase of slip-ons in each hand, stopping off at the Schweizerhof for a cool, frothy brew and bratwurst with a roll and mustard before hitting the Bahnhofstrasse in a mildly inebriated vim and a more mature, useful vigor. His first client that day was a Mistress Nicolette Chantal, bejeweled owner of Le Grand Boutique Bijoux, who fussed over his Steve McQueen hair and that Marilyn mole on the edge of his lip. She purchased 20 pairs of the Musicien Toscano, a stiletto built like a tap shoe that snapped as you trod the sidewalks. The champagne cream pair had often featured at weddings and funerals that previous season. This new model, however, also possessed a Venetian buckle made of gilded blue blown glass. Mistress Nicolette Chantal invited Pa to join her in a snifter of Armagnac and a plate of saucisson sec. One thing led to another. Eventually, in the Liederstube, they danced, he sniffing her equine neck, she wandering over his long elephantine earlobes with the tip of her nose. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd slipped off her negligee and she arched back like a panther in heat. In that moment, between confessions and further libations, Pa's own Pa, old Pa, appeared in the doorway, his hair glimmering in the moonlight from all the Brill cream. I've been told Pa was licking Mistress Nicolette Chantal's engorged nipple, and her left leg was raised with her pink toenails pointing toward the Sistine Chapel-shaped ceiling. Old Pa lifts the studio couch above his head. They say he could bench press 5 fully grown men on an old oak door, and tosses it in the direction of the unsuspecting coupling. From that day, my old man swore he would only ever sell industrial, factories, conglomerates, cooperatives, wily companies feasting on the fringes, all run by men vulcanized in their steadfast tread. He held his couch scar in high esteem and fondly recalled Mistress Nicolette Chantal his entire lifespan, until indeed at the end he announced his undying love for her. She, a married woman with 7 children who, had my mother not been, would have been his femme fatale until the end of time. And yet when she, Mistress Nicolette Chantal herself, died, that bruise on her eyelid never quite fully healed, she called out his name. "Vincennes!" she wailed, wrapping herself in the Egyptian linens of her choice. "Let us resurrect together and vulcanize in the winds of time like Vesuvius." And now I am delighted to...
Well, John's going to speak first about
okay.
Red Wheelbarrow.
Oh, sure. So let's hear about Red Wheelbarrow from you, John.
Yeah,
yes, hi, I'm John J Trause. I am very pleased to be here at Lit Balm with my great hosts and with my fellow Red Wheelbarrow Poets. The Red Wheelbarrow, as it's known, was founded as the William Carlos Williams Poetry Cooperative of Southern Bergen County, which is in New Jersey. That's a long name, so it's been shortened over time to the Red Wheelbarrow. It was founded by there was a symposium in September of 2005 created by Jane Fisher, who was the director at the time of the Rutherford Public Library, and the children's author Della Rowland. And it was a really wonderful event. It was held all day on a Saturday in September, which is the anniversary month of William Carlos Williams, the American poet, prose writer, novelist, and physician. I think you all know who he is. And you'll have to forgive me for my camera going on and off. I can't seem to get a good situation with this webcam. Anyhow, I had attended this event, and it was so really wonderful and successful that Jane Fisher, the library director, had invited me. At the time, I was the director of a nearby public library, Woodridge, which is my hometown, Woodridge Memorial Library. So my colleague Jane Fisher had called me to a meeting with some other people involved in the William Carlos Williams Poetry Symposium, with the intent that we would continue all this excitement for poetry and for William Carlos Williams, you know, to do something about it, to continue that excitement. So what we did is we founded a monthly reading series, which is still going very strong, now held at the Little Theater at Felician University in Rutherford. We founded a workshop, which is held monthly, originally in person. Now it's been on Zoom since the beginning of the pandemic. And also over time—
Weekly, John. Weekly.
Oh, what did I say? Monthly? Weekly, yeah. And on Zoom, in fact, Arthur Russell and Frank Rubino were the hosts of that weekly poetry workshop, which is still going strong and is very successful. And out of the workshop, through Jim Klein, who had been the I guess coordinator of the workshop, he's a retired professor of English and of writing. We launched back in 2008 our first issue of the Rutherford Red Wheelbarrow. So it's very exciting. So next month, October, we'll see issue 16 of which is the 2023 issue of the William Carlos of the Rutherford Red Wheelbarrow. And our work is in it. We have poetry, we have essays, high school poets, and some guest poets as well. So it's very exciting. So that's basically the history in a nutshell. But we also, I must say, we've had Judith Malina come out when she was alive. She had come out.
John, sorry to interrupt you. Your video is going in and out.
I realize that. I realize that.
Okay.
I'm trying to fix that, but it's not working so well. Anyhow,
Okay.
we had Judith Malina come out for that original symposium. We increased the symposium to a two-day festival and so forth. So those events had been running simultaneously with the Red Wheelbarrow events. And now really what we have are the workshop and the reading series every month. So that's about it. And I think my fellow Red Wheelbarrow poets could probably speak about the current goings on.
Maybe we should just start with a reading and take it from.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So we're delighted now to hear from Claudia Serea, who's a Romanian-American poet with poems published in Consequence, Field, New Letters, Prairie Schooner, The Puritan, Oxford Poetry, among many others. Her poems have been translated into Russian, French, Italian, Arabic, and Farsi, and have been featured on the Writer's Almanac. Claudia is the author of 7 poetry collections, most recently In Those Years No One Slept, from Broadstone Books in 2023. Claudia won a Pushcart Prize, the Joan Scott Kennedy Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of Virginia, and the New Letters Readers Award for her poems. Claudia is the founding editor of National Translation Month and serves on the board of the Red Wheelbarrow Poets and co-hosts their monthly meetings. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. In the Northeast is very rainy and very dreadful outside, but we're nice and cozy in. So thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. I've been with the Red Wheelbarrow Poets since 2007, and we kind of grew together into the group that we are today, kind of co-opting different members and morphing into the current formation. And right now, the core activities of the group are conducted by the so-called Gang of Six, which includes Arthur Russell, Anton, Yakovlev, Frank Rubino, myself, and Moira O'Brien as well. Very happy to be here. I want to read from my book, In Those Years No One Slept, that came out earlier this year. And I'll start with a title poem, which also starts with an epigraph from Federico Garcia Lorca. Out in the sky, no one sleeps, no one, no one. Some, like my grandfather, slept standing, hiding among corn stalks and listening for dogs. The woods were full of women dressed in black. The woods were full of veiled women who'd come to him and ask, "Did you see my son? Is he still alive?" The woods were full of veiled women and young men sleeping, standing behind every tree trunk. The woods were full. Young men wore rifles and slept standing behind every tree trunk. The women were dressed in black with large wings on their backs. Did you see my son, my husband, brother? The woods were full. So were the cemeteries, and everyone slept standing. So this is a book about history, the history of Romania, recent history, of my own family. And this next poem is titled The Paper Children, and it was a close second to be the title of the collection because I view as like I guess all of us, all humanity, as the paper children, kind of vulnerable to different acts of history. I sit on the floor and decorate the room with paper cutouts. Silhouettes of children snipped from a folded newspaper fall from my hands. They float around the room, dancing, playing, pretending they aren't gone. Who remembers their names, parents, birth certificates? The children paper the walls with voices and hum songs. Podul de piatră s-a dărâmat, a venit apa și l-a luat. The stone bridge is destroyed. The water came and took it away. Holding the words from the newsprint inside their bellies, meaningless clumps of letters, gone from their villages, gone from their mother's arms, names gone from their lips, floating above the room in ruins, still holding hands, still singing, pretending they don't know, until they get to the stove. A red tongue shoots out and licks them into oblivion. So I grew up in Romania under Nicolae Ceausescu's dictatorship. And this is a self-portrait on Independence Boulevard. I lived on Independence Boulevard, block 44, stair B, apartment 31st. From the 5th floor window, I could see the bread lines snaking down the sidewalk under the young linden trees that cast almost no shadows. There was an alimentare with shelves populated only by timeless jars of peach compote and cans of mackerel. Next, a butcher store, always closed, and an aprozar with dirty potatoes sprouted eyes in their broken crates. I grew up in that oblique gaze, across from a garage of rusty public buses and a plant that manufactured concrete wall panels. Here I am, quiet, scrawny, knee-scarred and ponytailed, feet strapped in brown leather and buckles to metal four-wheel roller skates, gliding in the vast emptiness of Independence Boulevard in my industrial city full of dust. without knowing what lies beyond that horizon of cement, rolling, rolling, rolling at high speed, leaning into the wind. And in summertime, we went to grandma, who had a very tiny garden where she grew tomatoes. And there was a fad at that time that everyone wanted to sell their locally grown tomatoes for export. So here's a poem titled, "We Ate the Ugly Ones." The good ones we picked and handled like eggs, sorted them by size and color, and placed them in rows in wooden crates. The Aztecs called them tomato, fat water with navel. The Italians pomodoro, apple of gold. And the scientists called them by the Latin name Solanum lycopersicum, wolf peach of the sun. My grandmother called the tomatoes platagen. If they were good looking, they were worth more money. Her knotty hands, stained green from their sap, used a soft rag to shine each platagen like wiping a child's face, then nestled it carefully in its tutu of wax paper. We ate the ugly ones, the scratched, the blemished, cracked, spotted, the overripe, the warted ones, tasty, fat from water and summer sun. The days were long, the lines to weigh the small crates longer, the money short. The yellow-green tomatoes went to export and ripened on the way. I wondered if anyone from the West knew when they picked them up from the supermarket shelf, weighing in hand the round red hearts. Did anyone know whose hearts they were, where they came from behind the iron curtain? I wondered if any of the ripe ones for the internal market would land on the dictator's plate. And if it did it bleed a little? Sweet juice under the knife. And then Chernobyl happened, Chernobyl days. We heard about it on Radio Free Europe. Weeks later, they distributed at school to each of us 2 small white pills of potassium iodine per day and wrapped the door handles in gauze, moistened with disinfectant. Some of my classmates never took them. Apartment keys tied around their necks, kids played outside all day as usual. Summer came quickly with no birds. Mom bought us cherries from the market, so rare she couldn't pass them by, and washed them really well. They glistened on the plate. And then years later, this is a poem based on, most of my poems are autobiographical. This is a poem about the time when I had a boyfriend and I was a student, and we went on to meet his parents. And winter break 1988. We traveled first by freezing train through the blizzard in the dark of the early morning, hours and hours through empty landscapes, then by rickety bus until it stopped when the road wasn't plowed any further and the driver said, "You're on your own, kids." There were no cell phones, no one around. We started on foot, 2 dots in the vast windswept plain, you in your suit and wool coat, hair slicked back, and me and my long skirt and high-heeled boots, all dolled up and hairsprayed to impress my future in-laws. When we got tired, we sat on the roadside and ate frozen sandwiches of grayish liver paste. We were the only man and woman in the world, leaving behind a shaky set of footsteps. A cart piled high with firewood passed by, and the drunken peasant picked us up. We perched on top of the wide fields until the next village when the man went home. So we were again on foot until a car filled to the roof with bread loaves stopped, and we crowded in the back in the warm, fresh scent. We rode through sheets of snowy night, red-nosed, glowing eyes, and we weren't cold at all. And I want to read this poem. To my surprise, we were talking about great surprises earlier, very unexpected. I got a poem accepted to be published in the Pushcart anthology this year. And it's based on events, facts from the Romanian Revolution from December 1989, when a lot of students took to the streets and regular people protesting the dictatorship. And the students in Bucharest, as I was a student too, and we were sent home because they didn't want us in the city. And while I was away, I saw a lot of these happening on TV. And my mom and I, we were making sausage before Christmas. Making sausage in the time of revolution. This sausage is made during martial law. Lights turned off and the window covered with a heavy blanket that still lets through the white streaks of the tracers in the night sky. Place a candle in the cup. In its shaky light, we look like ghosts. Think of the ghosts in the streets. Think of the fires on barricades, the only candles these souls will have. On the table, set up the cast iron grinder with its large enameled maw, its helix, gears, and iron clamp. Think of the tanks and armored vehicles advancing like huge night insects, tens of boots grinding the pavement. Start grinding the lean meat and the white belly fat, piece by piece, one red chunk, one white, one red, one white, red, white, stuff the grinder, careful to not catch your fingers. Think of the grinder that smashes students, young men and women shouting, Libertate, te iubim, or învingem, or murim. Freedom, we love you, we either win or we die. Grind, 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 grind. Stop and listen to explosions and the giddy chatter of the guns. Add salt, pepper to taste, crushed cloves of garlic and powdered sweet paprika. Taste the tear gas and pepper spray on students' faces. Sink your hands into the meat paste. Hungry roots that turn and lift again until blended and smooth. Add a little bone soup to soften the mix. Think of the water cannons, clotted bodies drenched in cold December. Pull the thin, almost transparent intestine onto the machine spout, bunched up white like the stocking of a high school girl. Think of that girl crowned with sniper bullets and start pushing the paste in the machine, against the machine. Push, 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 push with the force of a mudslide, its rage and fear and abandon. Push, 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 push until the dawn is born, unrecognizable and wet, and sanitation trucks roll in to wash the blood from the pavement. The candle burns to the bottom, and the only thing that remains is the smoke. And then I came to New York City, and this is a poem inspired by my commute on the bus, where I read all sorts of American poets, and it's titled 1954. In 1954, hands in his pockets, Frank O'Hara was walking at noon on the glaring New York City streets, thinking of poems and lunch. At 7 p.m., the sun was still strong in Romania. My father was 14 at the time and plowed his father's land hard as concrete with a horse blind in one eye, thinking no doubt about poems and dinner. On Fifth Avenue, O'Hara stopped, lit a cigarette, breathed in the smoke, and looked at the sky. My father stopped and smoked too, maybe even at the same time, inhaled, exhaled, and looked at the same sky. Yes, they were young, skinny, and thoughtful, and didn't know each other. But I imagined them sharing the gestures of lighting up, tight lips holding the cigarette, the flicker, the blue breath, the crust of the earth, the sun. Decades later, I'm reading the lunch poem on the bus and think of the lives of these two men, each one caught in his own grinding machine. And the rabbit runs from the field in Romania into a bar in New York City. foolish enough to believe it can escape. And I want to read another poem. Each year I go on vacation to see my parents and spend a little time with family. And we go to the Black Sea. So this is titled Rocks from the Black Sea. Kids always like to pick rocks, and we did each year, carrying pounds of heavy mementos on the bottom of our travel bags. Fingering them, I thought about soldiers who carry pebbles or a handful of soil from home in their pockets into the battle for good luck so they can return. And I remember how my father told me he picked up some rocks and dirt from his parents' grave, filled a bag, carried it hundreds of miles, and poured it over the cemetery plot he bought for him and Mom, so he wouldn't feel guilty anymore that he didn't visit his parents' tombs in a long time. I wonder if I'll do the same, wonder if I'm hoarding rocks and sand to fill the distance. On a wooden table outside, I gathered the stones around a weather lantern into a still life, a miniature landscape of memories from the sea, for good luck, so I can return. And it's almost a tradition to have a chat about current events and politics with family every time I visit. I'm sure everyone relates to that. So this is the moon, my brother and I. The moon, my brother and I sit outside at the wooden table covered with a white cloth and drink wine and moonshine from shiny tumblers. And we figure out the Americans, the Russians, the Romanians, the EU, and the Chinese. We're very well versed in this from decades behind the Iron Curtain. We know all about special interests, corporations, the military complex, stolen revolutions, the FSB, the Mossad, the CIA, the nationalists, and the globalists. Pour me some more freedom, baby brother. Alcohol makes us understand more. In its glaze, we see clearer for a few brief moments and agree. We're fucked. And we sleep well tonight. Happy at least we get it. Until morning, when everything is different. And I'll close with a poem that seems fitting for a rainy day today. It's titled, Forgive Me, I Ate Summer. It was fuzzy and still warm from the sun. I bit into its orb, slurped its juices, and some of them dripped on my chin. A few threads of flesh stuck in my teeth. Long after the last gulp, I kept tasting it in the sky of my mouth. It was delicious. It was delicious. It was delicious. And now it's gone. The last one, forgive me, from our tree of summers. All that's left of it, hold out your hand, love, is this wrinkled, poked pit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. Wonderful. Next, we hear from Arthur Russell, who comes from Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. Arthur works as an attorney and landlord in New Jersey. He has received writing fellowships from Syracuse University and the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center. Arthur won the Brooklyn Poets Poem of the Year in 2015 and was runner-up for the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award for 2021. He serves on the board of the Red Wheelbarrow Poets and co-leads their weekly workshop and co-hosts their monthly readings. Welcome, Arthur.
I'm unmuted. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. I feel like I wrote it myself. Cassandra, thank you for having me, and everyone here. It's great to be here. And thank you, Mark. I feel like I'd like to hear 15 more minutes of Claudia reading, but that was so wonderful. And among those poems was my favorite Claudia poem, the one about walking in the snow to meet your possible future in-laws. I think it was one of the earliest poems I heard you read, Claudia, in the workshop, and it stayed with me. So I too have a book out this year. It's called At the Car Wash. And it won the 2023 Rattle Chapbook Prize. And it came out about 2 weeks ago. The poems are about growing up in Brooklyn at my dad's car wash and working for him. And they dip into the lives of the people who work there and the lives of my family. I've been reading a lot from it recently, but I wanted to read just like the first 5 poems in the book, because that's the way the book was written in a way, or assembled. And I want to see how it sounds to other people. The book itself starts with an epigraph from Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 13, that really took the top of my head off when I read it for the first time, because I didn't know that the Bible got into matters such as this. And the quote is, "You shall not keep the hired man's wages with you through the night till morning." And that's actually from a newish translation by Robert Alter of the Old Testament, and worth reading on its own. So I'm going to start with the first 5 poems in the book. If there's any more time, maybe I'll read one more. The Car Wash. At the car wash, at dawn, the darkness of the plant was permissive. Sometimes it had a pilot flickering in the hull of a heater, or the canvas towel bin glowed in the pallid gray of the skylight. Every morning for 5 years, 1,800 mornings. We might hear an air leak or water drip while walking back with our coffee cups gimbaled between index and thumb, things we'd need to fix before we opened. And then at the electric panel, the knife switch took a palm to throw. The sequence of circuit breakers, compressors, and fluorescents coming on satisfied the order etched where habit met identity. Alan went to hang his Army field coat, and I walked the wash tunnel, collecting license plates and other parts from yesterday, charmed by the rust that bloomed overnight on the polished steel plate flooring and washed away each morning. Alan came to grease the bearings. The white grease pushed the greasy water out. And raising the garage doors to put out the signs, I saw the lights progress, the men arriving, checked the trash cans, got money for the register, hung the card of pine trees in the cashier booth, the tape loop playing in the empty customer walkway, selling hot wax to no one. And then we opened, and the cars came, and the people nodded to us and stood with crossed arms, watching the steam guns, the vacuum wands, the mats flung sideways to the mat rack for a rinse. And even as we watched, our lives peeled back and shed one layer, exposing the new day's delicate skin. The next poem is called Checkout Man. The checkout man was the last man to dry off the car and wipe off the seat and do whatever else the owner of the car wanted before they drove away. Checkout Man. Between cars, Freddie Rogers could spin a damp towel on his finger as if it were a terry cloth pizza. Take a quick drag off his Winston, go, yeah, to anything I'd say to him, turn his hat brim front to back or back to front, excuse himself, and start out towards the bus stop where a girl he knew or wished to know was waiting for the B-68 to Coney Island. Then give up as she passed inside, restore his Winston to the ledge, and flip his spinning towel ahead to land on the hood of the next car out. Next poem is one that introduces a theme that then runs throughout the book. It's about my relationship with my dad as, you know, the guy who owned this car wash where I worked. It's called How to Replace a Toilet. First, have a father, one who owns a car wash where he employs poor Black men, preferably those who've come north in the Great Migration. But any poor Black men will do, as long as they have historical disadvantages that have translated into self-destructive behavior that makes them targets for disdain and predatory labor practices. Grow up at his kitchen table. Hear his precise mimicry of their accents, mockery of their foibles, his weirdly intimate knowledge of their weaknesses and hopes, bordering on and even bleeding over into affection that never reaches all the way to respect. Go to work for your father. Start off drying the cars at the exit end and gradually learn all the jobs while inhaling his attitudes towards the men who work beside you. And although you, made differently, or is it just youth and naive sympathy, appreciate their struggle. See them come to work still drunk from the night before while you spent your summers at summer camp learning how to smoke pot behind the bunkhouse. Get paid the same net $1.25 an hour the men get, with the difference that they are living on it, and you are saving up to buy a Sony stereo music system to play Carole King's Tapestry. Learn how to send the men home with no work on slow days, how to absorb their abuse, their special hatred of your father, blooming when drunk, transferred to you, how to resist their requests for new uniforms to replace the worn ones that you send to the local dry cleaner for patching. Lean over their shoulders as they vacuum the cars to stop them from sucking up the change in the ashtrays. Follow them around the corner to stop them from buying beer on their 45-minute lunch for which your father charges them an hour. One Saturday at 7 a.m., when Jerry Howard uses his one call from jail to call your father, go to the Brooklyn Men's House of Detention on Bowroom Place to bail him out after he got arrested during a fight with his wife, because Jerry is your best entrance driver. And it's Saturday, 2 days after a messy snow, and you may wash 1,000 cars. Another time, find Frederick Hyde, hiding inside his locker after closing, hoping to burglarize the place if you lock him in. And listen, always listen, even when you argue against him, to your father's embattled justifications for stealing from the men's tip box, for withholding taxes from men he pays off the books, and for giving them alarm clocks for Christmas, but only if they come to work that day. So you're ready one morning when someone tells you that the men's toilet is broken, and you go into that cubicle to see that it's not the flush valve or the toilet seat, but the commode itself, the vitreous bowl that has cracked with an obvious fissure from base to rim, where someone has jammed a flask-sized liquor bottle upside down in the drain, and evidently stepped on the base of it, hoping that the bottle, not the commode, would break apart and flush away so that the bottle would not be found in the trash and raise suspicions that he'd been drinking on the job. Go to your father, where he sits behind his gray steel desk making tea, and tell him what happened. And wait while he squeezes the tea bag against the spoon and swings it deftly by the string into the waste paper basket before he looks up at you over his half-moon reading glasses and says, "Well, fix it, Sonny." Admit that you don't know how to change a toilet. Watch your father take a stubby pencil from his back pocket and draw a schematic diagram of a toilet on a writing tablet. Listen to him explain with the same patience and easygoing charm he used when he talked to your teachers on Parents' Day, the 2 bolts, the wax ring, the pipe wrenches, the Teflon tape. Then make up a list of parts for you and send you in his Lincoln to Davis and Warsaw to get what you'll need. Then call you back at the door to remind you to put a board across the toilet before you go, or they'll use it while you're gone and you'll have to clean out their shit by hand. Thank you. This next one is called The Men's Lunch Table. It was right outside the office, and there were a couple of diner stools that had been bolted to tire rims. And the old lunch table was from a diner that had closed across the street. The Men's Lunch Table. When Alan's kid Wayne, they lived in Mitchell Llama housing on Shorefront Parkway in Rockaway Beach, had a snake. I caught flies at the men's lunch table to feed it. Even if they'd flinch when my nearby sideways thumb up ambushing hand began to move, they'd have to rise straight up 1/4 of an inch before they could flee horizontally. Go figure. Who knew? It's a fly thing. They would smack my palm like a shuttlecock. I'd bounce to stun them on the tabletop and drop them short one wing in the plastic grated Parmesan cheese container, holes on top. The snake won't eat them if they're not alive. Thank you.
One more, come on, one more.
Well, this one is called Plant Life. It's in little tercets, but it goes on for about 4 pages. So I'll end with this one. Yeah, nothing to only say this. The word plant, which means a place where stuff gets built or made or manufactured. I looked it up because that's what we called the car wash. We called it the plant. But as I was writing this book, I wondered where that word came from. And I do believe, although there was nothing positive on it in any of the sources I looked at, that plant is short for plantation. Plant life. There were men who worked for him for decades, for bupkis. That's Yiddish for nothing. There were men who worked for him for decades, for bupkis, less withholding, right there at the corner of Church Avenue and Coney Island Avenue, as seen in photos from the era, with cars of the era, and men in hats of the era, men who lived in Bushwick and Crown Heights and South Williamsburg, men who knew me as his son, whom I managed in my 20s, who had their wages paid daily or weekly on Sunday, one man at a time, coming into the office, having a few words of thanks from him, standing while he sat behind the gray desk, opening the 2 small envelopes, one containing net pay and the other smaller one, that man's share of what was left from the tip box after my father took most of the tips for himself. Not, he explained, to make himself richer, but to keep the men poor and needing to return to work the next day. The envelopes were prepared by my mother on Saturday. She wrote the man's name in her Lincoln High School script in green felt tip pen because she had to fight every day to keep hold of her identity and sense of fun, and green was her color. There was an oversized spreadsheet where she showed her calculations. The men all knew her and said hello. And she asked about the women of the ones who had women, though many of our men were city living men who stayed behind rooming house doors and dropped off laundry. She held a ruler under each man's line so they could see across the line and sign in the last column. It had solemnity, the sudden quiet of bringing men into that office. Usha Schneider, the manager, smoking a Benson and Hedges, watched. Some of the men, Eddie Ellis was one, after they changed out of their green coveralls with yellow embroidered lettering into street clothes, drew chunky black rimmed reading glasses out, partially to see and partially to participate in that solemnity. Harry Obey showed up in the big white double-breasted overcoat he wore in winter with deeply notched lapels. The office was up a narrow flight of steel steps. The men lined up at the foot of the stairs and came up one at a time. My father gave the men either an alarm clock or a transistor radio for Christmas in alternating years. I was there. He wanted us to learn about life from his car wash. So we counted his money and dried his cars. Even my sister worked there as a cashier for maybe 2 days before my mother shut it down. This is why I tell the story of taking the stitches out of Pete Wilson's scalp with a single-edged razor and a surgical clamp at the men's lunch table so Pete wouldn't miss an afternoon of work. Arthur, sonny, Pete needs his stitches out. Go out to the men's lunch table and take Pete's stitches out. At the men's lunch table, where I sometimes caught flies in my hand for Alan to take home for his son's snake, Pete Watson's scalp with its dandruff and scabs and the minor popped release as I lifted the surgical knots of his stitches free of the amber crust around the wound. The doctor shaved zone around the chair leg wound and the lanolin sniff of his scalp and the new stubble coming in and the nearness of his warm head. This is what my father wanted me to know. This very week, as I was getting ready to write this poem, my brother told me of the time he stood with our father at the men's lunch table, where Clayton Parker sat on one of the red diner stools, drunk out of his mind, bent over in his reddish-brown woolen coat, defeated by alcohol, but drawn to work by a force as strong as the body he nightly partly self-embalmed. And how my father guided my brother's hand to Clayton Parker's horizontal back and told my brother to rest his hand there and instructed him to feel the way the drunk man's skin from beneath the depth of his stupor through his coat twitched, though you couldn't see it. And then he asked my brother if he felt it.
That was so good. You said you might have one more.
All right. Well, I'm going to read the last book in the last poem in the book. It's called The Jetty. I don't live in Brooklyn anymore, but well, you'll see. The Jetty. You know, Brooklyn borders on Rockaway Inlet, and Coney Island is there, and then the ocean comes, but I guess that's in here as well. The Jetty. I stood on the slanted, wet black stones piled from Brighton Beach into Rockaway Inlet with coffee and a cigarette metallic in the cold, salt air. Behind me, the 6-story shtetl of bricks and heavy Jewish food, backed up to the elevated subway, spine of the old neighborhood, escape route bending north over Mrs. Stahl's knishes towards Manhattan. Before me, Grandma Eva's ocean threw up lattices of spume from the blistered sea. I cuffed the drips in winter nose I inherited from my father and squinted towards the wind from Breezy Point, past which I'd sailed as far as Ambrose Lightship once to see the ocean open past explaining. I swabbed locker rooms at 17 and mowed the lawn around white and red impatiens planted in the shape of the burgee of the yacht club where I tendered members to their sailboats at moorings in Sheepshead Bay. Evenings, when they'd all gone home, on my last run among the tethered boats that always swung to face the tide, I smoked and listened to My Love on a cream-colored transistor radio with a gold-toned grill and the name Electra etched in red script beside the thumb wheel for the volume. I winched the lightning boats from their trailers on race days and swung them out on a davit over a cyclone fence down to the bay, then followed in the committee boat past Kingsborough College and the seaside nursing home called Menorah, where 40 years later, my father would die. Dropped anchor in the inlet and fired blanks from a cannon to start the race that sent this regatta of school teachers, doctors, tradesmen, and a woman named Wendy with short, dark hair around a course of red and black channel markers, buoys and bells, white hulls like whale bellies turned upwards on a broad reach, or raising painted spinnakers like pregnant women in summer dresses, though none of this could reach me where I bobbed unhappily and waited for the race to end. And then at 33, after years of working with a damp towel over my shoulder and my arms crossed on my chest as the exit manager of the Hollywood car wash on Coney Island Avenue, speaking college French with the Haitians who dried our cars, and leaving for law school while living still in Brighton Beach, I stood on these same rocks, reciting mnemonic devices to prepare for the bar exam. The summer I also came the closest to dunking a basketball in the playground at Brightwater Court. And 30 years later, with hips as brittle as butter chip cookies, I climb these rocks again, to stare at the sea and back at the beach and the boardwalk and the men's room under the boardwalk where a boy once showed me his penis. I cut my feet on the broken bottle here when I ran with my sister to catch the orange drink man. I came for Tuesday fireworks and found my grandparents laughing with their neighbors in woven web beach chairs when they were my age now. I brought girls home in my red Monte Carlo. I bought sturgeon from the fish store and cooked it in garlic and butter. I lived across from the synagogue where you could hear the men through the open windows murmuring on Yom Kippur, while women outside wondered how long after sunset the rabbi would keep them. I will never leave this place. Buy my book. You can get it from Rattle. It's only $5.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you all.
Next, we hear from J Trause, the director of Oradell Public Library, the author of Why Sing from Sensitive Skin Press, a book of traditional experimental poems, Picture This for Your Eyes and Ears, Dos Madres, a book of poems on art, film, and photography, exercises in high trees and great weather for media, a book of fictive translations, found poems, and manipulated texts, Eye Candy for Andy, 13 most beautiful poems for Andy Warhol's screen tests from Finishing Line, Inside Out, Upside Down, and Round from Nirala Publications, Seriously Serial, Latter Day Litany, the latter staged off-Broadway. John's translations, poetry, and visual work appear internationally in many journals, including Literary Review East, the Antioch Review, the Artist Periodical Crossings, the Dala Journal Maintenant, etc., and many anthologies. Maymark Press has published his visual poetry and art as broadsides and sheets. He's the subject of a 30 in 30 essay on the operating system written by Don Zerilli, and an author of an essay on Baroness Elsa at the same site, both in April 2016. He shared the stage with Stephen Van Zandt, Andrei Codrescu, Anne Waldman, Jerome Rothenberg, the page with Billy Collins, William Carlos Williams, Woody Allen, Ted Kuzer, Pope John Paul II, and he has been in the cage with a Cumenian Sybil, Ezra Pound, Hannibal Lecter, Andrei Chikatilo, and George the Animal Steel. John is founder of the William Carlos Williams Poetry Cooperative, the Red Wheelbarrow, who are reading for us here tonight in Rutherford, New Jersey, and the former host and curator of its monthly reading series. John is fond of cunning acrostics and color-coded chiasmus. Welcome, John.
Hi, thank you very much, Mark. And thank you very much, Cassandra. And I thank my fellow Red Wheelbarrow Poets, Claudia and Arthur. That was really a brilliant reading from both of you. I really enjoyed it. I apologize for not having my a good webcam. I have one on my laptop and I have an external one, neither of which seem to be working. So you'll just have to hear my voice. So as was mentioned, I have a book called Eye Candy for Andy. It's based on 13 screen tests of Andy Warhol. Whenever a visitor would go into his studio, he would ask, whether it was a famous person or not, he would ask that person to sit for about a 2-minute video, or maybe a little longer, and then he would screen it at 4 minutes. So one of my blurbists is Billy Name, whose original name was Billy Lineage, and he was the one who lit the factory. He was a lighting designer for stage on Broadway, off Broadway. And he also was the one who lined everything in silver and painted everything silver in that second factory that was on East 47th Street. So there is a poem in here, aside from him being one of my blurbists, who has passed on, unfortunately. We have a poem, Billy Name. Lighting by Billy, lit by Billy, lining by Billy, silver by Billy, and what's in a name with eyes disguised, named by Billy. The second edition of that book just came out. The first edition appeared in 2013. This current one came out in both paperback and hardcover from Finishing Line Press, and this new second edition really is a deluxe. I mean, both paperback and hardcover are quite deluxe. So I'm pleased with that. I know that we have some Russian speakers, including Anton, of course, who grew up in Moscow and in Massachusetts. And I know that Cindy Hockman, my colleague from Brevitas, know Russian. And so this is a poem from my book, Exercises in High Treason. And the title of this poem is the Cyrillic letter J. It's that very beautiful letter that looks like an X with a vertical line going through it. And it's also called, the letter is also called živite, which means live, an imperative in Russian. Vladimir Nabokov said that it was the most beautiful letter in the Cyrillic alphabet and the most beautiful sound in the Russian language. So this is the poem, Je. Live in the leisure and knowledge of pleasure and treasure the measure of closure, it promises. Gather the azure corsages and osiers, pasture with crozier, inclusion and closure. Reject all derision in your supervision and forsake all collusion, whatever your vision. While supping in Asia on Elysian ambrosia and sipping a giviet beside a warm brazier, supplied by the burning of delicate osiers, let not the intrusion of daydream delusions of Zsa Zsa Gabor cooing bonjour in rouges, or Jacques Bergerac in Gigi, mar the precision of visions of grandeur. Such Parisian illusions will only occasion these facile protrusions. Poor Zsa Zsa, all covered in lesions, abrasions, incisions, and deep in aphasia and moral amnesia, follows her collision with life and a seizure with explosions, extrusion, and dripping infusions, beside her ménage, étagère, anesthesia, while the prince once again contemplates euthanasia. A decision he envisions includes some misprisions, some legal provisions, and final revisions, concision, abscissions, excisions, rescissions, to last will in testament and all its divisions, and engages in dressage, the medics in triage, the funeral cortege, entourage, and reportage, and by this elision I make my conclusion. Je. And now from my book, also Exercises in High Treason, since it's National Translation Month, September, I am going to read this poem called Lark, and it's a translation from the French. Lark. Lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. I'm going to pluck your head and your head. I'm going to pluck your head. Lark, lark, oh lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. I'm going to pluck your eyes. I'm going to pluck your eyes and your head and your head. Lark, lark, oh lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. I'm going to pluck your ears. I'm going to pluck your ears and your eyes and your eyes and your head and your head. Lark, lark, oh lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. I'm going to pluck your nose. I'm going to pluck your nose and your ears and your ears and your eyes and your eyes and your head and your head. Lark, lark, oh lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. I'm going to pluck your mouth. I'm going to pluck your mouth and your nose and your nose and your ears and your ears and your eyes and your eyes and your head and your head. Lark, lark, oh lark, nice lark, lark. I'm going to pluck you. And that is by one of my favorite authors, Trad Anonymous. And of course, it is the translation of the French folk song Alouette, which was a chicken plucking song, Alouette, otherwise known as Lark. Now from my book, it's my first full-scale collection, Inside Out, Upside Down, and Round, I'll do this poem about extreme states of being in the United States and in Europe. I'm a big fan of Dada. In fact, I'm published every year in Maintenant, as we heard from my bio. And this year I have actually a collage that's reproduced. And I take part in the Dada activities every year. Man Ray and Mina Loy are raping me. Man Ray and Mina Loy are raping me, and I'm loving it. Not the Weimaraner or the Hollywood actress, not Fay Ray, not Myrna Loy, but the artist and the poet, and you know it. I'm loving it. The late sequential phone calls and midnight madness, the police standing at my door, demonic attractions, visitors, the dark places, the 1,000 steps, 10,000 stairs, the stars. I'm loving it. Who's that clogging up my pores? We had karma in the apartment. We have karma at the house, but who will change the light bulb? Naked in Europe, one survives earthquakes in Assisi and heat waves in Wiesbaden, cold espresso cocktails and only fresh fruit and Fruchtgummi, Gorgonzola Tedesca, alpestrin amnesia in dancing clothes. One stays alone because, you know, no one shares a room with John, the Don. I'm loving it. But who will change the light bulb? And as one gazes at La Pina di San Pietro, no Pignoli, Pinolli, the Queen of Heaven's pessary plugging up the Vatican, one longs for the comedy to be finished, the comedo to be extracted, the cone to come undone. Man Ray and Mina Loy are raping me, and I'm loving it. And now, while we're on a Italian theme, I'll read this series, these two poems. The first actually takes place in Ridgefield, New Jersey, where Man Ray used to live back in the teen years of the 20th century. He lived in an artist colony, and his first artworks were paintings of the Meadowlands, the New Jersey Meadowlands in Bergen County. So this is called At the Art Deco Palazzo Belvedere. At the Art Deco Palazzo Belvedere in 1998, while party guests partied and played, and two extra-large mediums read tarot at opposite ends of the edifice, fittingly appointed in black and white, straight and curved lines intersecting. I wandered into the dining room to appropriate a long scarf, a perforated chrome charger, and a white marble Art Deco bust of a woman glancing over her shoulder, and arranged them into an assemblage in the living room, and invited the party guests to see my newly created impromptu masterpiece, which I proclaimed Isadora. And now for, again, also in an Italian theme, but also Art Deco. This is called Deco Atlas Mussolini. 1. Rockefeller Center, New York City, 1937. Deco Atlas with the face of Mussolini holding up a hollow globe with bending knee to bolster his celestial load, now genuflex as if to honor the Cathedral of St. Patrick and the church for which it stands. And though approved by Mussolini at the time, he was embarrassed when they noticed his own icon paid obeisance to the church. 2. St. Stephen's Church, St. Stephen's Church, Boston, 1995. The celebrated crowds that throng the church at which the funeral mass for Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy is held include some mighty folk, but even Atlas, Mussolini, Schwarzenegger, genuflects. Thank you. And now, my poem, Seahorse. All of these poems have been published or are soon to be published, but they're not in any books yet. This is Seahorse. And it takes place actually under the sea, but also in New York City. Seahorse. And how did you in your yellow sheen get into my Mai Tai at a tiki bar called Otto's Shrunken Head? Hypnotic but not potable hippocampus, shooting babies from its chest, plastic, diaphanous, dazzling, a dizzy one would say ekphrastic, not unlike a silly simile one would make about a phosphorescent, iridescent octopus's camouflage, a chromosham pelagic, cephaloplotic ploy now splashed with curacao, crème de ciel, ou enfer, en mer, oh hell, but just as well tragic, like the loss of childhood and innocence and incense and wormwood, sloshed with orgeat syrup, cyanic, lost in lime juice, sluiced through ice cubes, nice, not neat, under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade, without the shade of a tiny toy umbrella. Seahorse. And now I'll do, again, because of National Translation Month, I'll recite in Latin a poem by Quintus Horatius Flaccus, the ancient Roman poet who wrote in Latin, otherwise known as Horace. It's the fifth ode in his first book of odes. And then I'll do my translation from my book, Exercises in High Treason. Quis multa gracilis te puer in rosa, perfusus liquidis orget odoribus grato pura subantro, qui flauram relegas comam simplex munditis, hau quotiens vide mutatosque, Deos flebet et aspera nigris aequora ventis te mirabitor insolens, qui nunc te fruito credulus aurea, qui semper vacuam, semper amabilem, sperat nescius aurae fallacis, misere quibus in temptatenites, me tabula sacer votiva paries indicatui dos suspendissi potenti, vestimenta maris Deo. And the poem's basically about, as you'll hear from my translation, it's a poem about it's addressed to a woman who's been around the block a few times, who's seducing this young man in this beautiful setting. And Horace warns that he too has had his heart broken, and he uses the metaphor of weather turning dark and nasty, which is perfect for today here in northeastern New Jersey. It's pretty nasty out, pretty rainy and windy. So this is the translation of Horace Odes, book 1, number 5, Quis multa gracilis te puer in rosa. What slender boy, O Pyrrha, bathed in scents, free-flowing in the midst of many a rose beneath a pleasant grotto holds you close? For whom do you bind back your golden hair, simply exquisite in your sense of class? How often will this one lament, alas, your infidelity and altered fate? How often will he in his innocence be so amazed by your rough temperament, so rough with darker blasts? This one who now enjoys you and believes you golden fine, expect you to be always clear and kind, unmindful so of your deceitful airs. Oh, miserable are they to whom you shine untried. The sacred wall of this my shrine with votive tablet indicates that I have also hung my garments, ocean steeped, to that almighty Godhead of the deep. That's Quintus Horatius Flaccus, otherwise known as Horace. And now from my book, Why Sing, I have a poem, which is actually, we could say, based on a true story about a friend of mine who lived, I used to live in Cincinnati in Ohio in the mid 1980s. And this is called He Had a Heart as Big and Wide as Idaho. Or else Ohio, where he lived his days and worked the late shift, pumping gas at Sunoco. Or was it Texaco? Ohio? She had an ass as vast as Canada is wide in his geography, encyclopedia, or gazetteer. There were two of them, Helga and Jennifer. Or was it Guinevere? They made sandwiches and pressed the flesh behind the quick check counter, and he would sing to one or the other as she passed, "Thou hast an ass as vast as Canada or Idaho. Vast wastelands and the Badlands praise you too." They made sandwiches of him, so slim, between them, and rocked him gently into sleep in a prairie lullaby. And from another book, Picture This for Your Eyes and Ears, which is a collection of poems about art, film, art history, photography. This comes from the film section. And each one of my books is published by a different publisher. This one is published by Dos Madres Press in Ohio, by the way. And it struck me that there were 4 films in which the line dance called the Madison is performed. And I mention all 4 films and all the actors in the films and the characters in the films and the directors in this poem. It just struck me that this line dance would have made it on film, at least 4 films. So it's called the Madison, and the title of the poem is We Do the Madison, and it comes from the film section of my book. Picture this for your eyes and ears. They do the Madison, we do the Madison, come take your medicine, and now do the Madison. Godard does the Madison. Waters does the Madison. Even Martin Hines, Between the Lines, does the Madison. Chris Marker, a real larker, really dark, does the Madison. From Paris to Baltimore, Mojave to Patterson. They do, we do, you do the Madison. Le Jolimet does the Madison. Bonaparte does the Madison. Hairspray does the Madison. One better, The Go-Getter, In a Dream does the Madison. Odile does the Madison. Arthur does the Madison. France does this dance that we know is the Madison. Karina does the Madison. Brasseur does the Madison. Even Sammy Frey, to be sure, every way does the Madison. Tracy Turnblad and her gang drinking Tang do the Madison. Ricky Lake, in one take, does the Madison. You want more, Baltimore? Passaic, Pompton Lakes, Pascack, and Patterson all do the Madison. Mercer does the Madison. Kate does the Madison. Wait, not too late. Even Jolie does the Madison. Pucci, Deschanel, and Malone do the Madison. They do the Madison. We do the Madison. Come take your medicine, and let's do the Madison. And also from, thank you. And also, and I'm going to be concluding with 2 short poems, also from the film section in my book, Picture This for Your Eyes and Ears, is a poem called Munchkin Orgy. It's very short, and it is in response to what had long thought to have been rumors about the Munchkins in the making of The Wizard of Oz in the late 1930s, having orgies. It was thought that it was just a rumor spread by Judy Garland. However, recent film historians and people who were cast as the Munchkins have confirmed that, yes, indeed, they did have orgies. So it's called Munchkin Orgy. I'll get you, my pretty. Surrender, Dorothy. Swallow my yellow thick load. Munchkin Orgy. And now for my final poem, I shall read a poem called List. It is a List poem, but it's also about John List. Those of you who know a little bit about true crime, especially true crime in New Jersey, may know that in 1971, John List, who lived in Westfield, New Jersey, had killed his entire family, skipped town, but the crimes were not discovered for months because he set it up that, he told the police to watch his house. He wrote letters to the school and to his job and told everyone that the family was going on an extended vacation when in actuality he had killed them all. So this is called List, and it's my last poem. Helen is on the floor in the ballroom. The kids, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, are on the floor in the ballroom. Mother, Alma, is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move. I am out of here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, really.
Thank you.
And next we hear from Anton Yakovlev, who is the author of 4 poetry chapbooks: Kronos Dines Alone from Servision, winner of the James Tate Poetry Prize; Ordinary Impalers from Kelsey, The Ghost of Grant Wood from Finishing Line, and Neptune Court, from the Operating System. Anton's poems have appeared in the New Yorker, the Hopkins Review, Plume, Reed Magazine, Upstreet, Poetry Daily, and elsewhere. His translations from Russian have appeared in Exchanges, Circumference, On the Seawall, and Yes Poetry, among many others. The bilingual volume, The Last Poet of the Village, selected poems by Sergei Yesenin, translated by Anton, came out from Sensitive Skin Books in 2019. Anton is a graduate of Harvard University and has also written and directed several short films. Anton co-hosts the Carmine Street Metrics reading series in Manhattan and the Rutherford Red Wheelbarrow reading series in Rutherford, New Jersey. Anton is a former education director at Bowery Poetry Club. Welcome, Anton.
Well, thank you so much. And it's really an honor to be reading in this event. Really a tough act to follow. Claudia, Arthur, John, your readings are dazzling. I'll try to follow it. I will fail to do justice, but I'll try. I'm going to start with the poem. In a few days, these walls will disappear. In a few days, these walls will disappear, and I'll hold on to whatever memory leaves. The pictures, the blue notebooks, the odd fight. People will ask me why I look so tired. Their grins will flicker out. We'll fill awkward pauses with death. I'll drive past the big statue of a government official, shrug, mistake words for silence. Despite myself, I love Christmas lights that hang over our lack of goodbyes, though I have it on good authority that we'll die. The departed don't move, but deflate. I was 7 when I first set foot in these rooms. Shadows hadn't learned how to hide. Better put the camera away, force myself to reconstruct all this in my obsessions. At my signal, the smell of pines overwhelms. A horse runs toward a candle. I spend all afternoon looking for an old photo album, come up instead with a new melody for a singer who passed away. I don't want to talk about it. Ignoring the countdown to the explosion, I smash the love locks on bridges, but no lovers are around to grant forgiveness. This next poem is called The Diner. 1. When I enter the diner, the radio is already blaring your name. You are wanted, dead or alive, for implying there is something wrong with the country's agricultural infrastructure. No one else knows who you are. You order a shake with extra caffeine. 2. It's late October, and several of your nephews have gathered at your old family compound. Their security blankets fill the guest rooms with a subtle scent of saliva. In the living room, your so-called cousin, who works so-called construction, is digging her way through a piano sonata. Her left pinky won't cooperate, hence the unintentional syncopation. The tiny camera in her newsboy cap transmits everything to an underground security bureau in the woods. It snows during your afternoon walk. You take shelter in a gazebo. Your 4-year-old nephew joins you. Together, you free associate about the snowflakes that vamp on your sleeves. Your so-called cousin arrives, clarinet in hand. There's an unscheduled freight train leaving the station just before midnight. She tells you to get on it, but a barely noticeable shrug hints that she won't do anything if you disappear. 3. I order a bacon burger with cauliflowers and sit on a jungle gym outside the diner. I dial your home number. I know someone else lives there now. It's been years since anyone heard from you. After a few rings, some dog starts barking. 4. At the site of the demolished labor camp, a new apartment complex is being built. The local university missed the deadline to add the labor camp to the list of protected landmarks. Bulldozers unearth skeletons almost daily. Just down the block from the diner, half concealed by wolfberry bushes, sits the locomotive of the freight train that trafficked political prisoners to the camp. College-bound children boarded to drink cream sherry. The killed are even in our shoes. On TV, on the crosses atop our churches, we throw conferences to panel about our trauma. And always more thought, more vertigo. Thinking is all we can do not to waste our time, but we can barely walk straight. Distant relatives in pools of acid, clavicles sticking out of the hills just beyond town's edge. When 60 years after the massacre, the placards finally go up on familiar street corners, even lyrics of passing bands sound like 2,000 children were knifed to death on this playground by their classmates' parents. Sound like over half of the city's residents were legally murdered by their neighbors. Sound like at this church parishioners received preemptive forgiveness for the fratricide they were encouraged to commit. By the 19th song, the hats of the concert goers look like ancestors groaning in their summer hammocks at the returning faces of friends and colleagues whose throats they had methodically sliced open. And then it's back to the parking lot, back to the squeezed SUV in a compact space, a tug of ticket anxiety, a sigh of relief at the empty windshield. The dead recede for a while, and the creme brulee burns the tongue. Purchase relief with masochism, trick ourselves into rhetoric. If there are flies, the infuriation is welcome. A whooping month until another crowd of the strategically executed stops traffic by the little theater. The night before conscience strikes, the air fills with Dostoevsky. A little thunder, Possum's recursive arguments. The weather-vane birds spin so fast, we cannot tell if they are parliaments or murders. We learn about ourselves weeks later from newspapers we forgot to recycle. The collapse of the Union. We all agree he was a wicked man, unworthy of the fame he had amassed. Neurotic, petty, sickeningly bland. Billboards bemoan the easy way he passed. Ambassadors of love smeared dogshit on his gravestone sooner than his corpse turned blue. I cracked champagne at hearing he was gone. If you ever met him, shame on you. No mercy for the hateful thugs who feel the need to come to his defense. They'll see their assets wiped, their crimes revealed, their homesteads seized. Economy depends on revenue these seizures generate. Pale seagulls pick stale bread from our cracked plate. Ceasefire. When love sprung up so swiftly after war crimes, thoughts of gentle hands and touching eyes felt sacrilegious. Far too many corpses were pulled each day from reservoir ice. Tanks rolled down the streets again, igniting insecure Cupid's fussy cuckoo's nest. All you'll remember is the mangled biker left in the street with track marks on his chest. This next poem is called Angry, and You Should Be. The man whose most sensitive poem I knew by heart rejoiced to my face at another man's suicide. Some wondered at my silence the rest of the evening. The next day, we talked religion with friendly faces. Stepping into a Far Hill store for some marked up antiques, he mocked the owner and wished him an early death. Last time we spoke, bloated banisters encircled the porch in a nod to pythons. Grass glistened with the saliva of recently departed elk. I was running out of poker face. I hear he still blasts his tasteful, edgy music, speeding his sonata from farmland to farmland, though the singers are afraid to scream. I think back to him at his cavernous makeshift desk years prior, writing his masterpiece. Metronome rain must have pushed him into iambic trimeter. Each stanza a wake-up call, each spondee a storm, each rhyme a dog, each open wound a brotherhood, each place of worship a twist, each god a diminishment. The poem walks through hells like a stone commander, thumping transfigured brimstone, holograms in place of traditional hellfire. The poem looks thoughtfully around the church. There's the bleeding, there's the decomposition. The camera circles the humans in elegant pews. I loved debating Christ with him, another friend confides. So sensitive, so smart. What is he up to now? Zooming in on the faces, the camera reveals turkey vultures. Meanwhile, the widow of the suicide celebrates their 5th son's retirement from Little League by sponsoring a small wildlife island. Who said their lives were mere echoes? On Boxing Day morning, all 6 of them walk to the cliff and hang glide expertly over the distance. He left them enough money to keep them all adrift in idle anomie for the rest of their lives, if they choose to, but they're choosing differently. They have removed his chair from the dining room, too much of a cliche to keep it dustily there. His disembodied voice drifts across the marshes, and it's the marshes, not the voice, that fascinate them. Or those corners away from foot traffic, where yellow-crowned night herons dissect herrings and burrowing owls burrow. If you approach them, they will lazily fly away, more as a formality than out of genuine fear, then return as soon as you've crossed the tracks. So I think we all know that so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens, but we don't hear as much about wheelbarrows of other colors. So I'll mention a blue wheelbarrow. This poem is called And Then. Your blue wheelbarrow isn't used for much. not by your widow, not by Junior. Your garden's pissed away its beehive touch. Your motorboat smells like a funeral. Light drizzle sprays your chessboard, moving rooks. Your poetry is sleeping in your books. Your unsent emails hover in the cloud, somewhere in a quartz pile under a street. Snoring over his burger and his stout, Jesse can almost hear your stomping feet, your tennis balls brushing against the net, your swear words when you lost your final set. And in the valley, rolling sprinklers still trip on the holes your footprints made in dirt that evening when it took you so much skill just to put on your favorite dress shirt. Brian recalls your least abrasive joke, gulps soda water, and begins to choke. Your ivy sags like a departed snake. Ghosts of your cheeses haunt the cutting board. Senators nurse your policy mistake. Voicemail preserves your last dismissive word. Your portrait, no one dared to show or frame, rots in the attic with a made-up name. This poem is called Today is a Mistake in Any Cosmology. Remember the ravens had a name for each of us? Then we got on the bus and you told me you didn't want to see me anymore. I thought I had known the color of your hair. We continued to call each other. I was trying not to let my foot off the memory of walking with you along the ocean. Dusk, and everyone buying fireflies at the market, the band trying to finish their set while the concert hall was being demolished. I never loved the wrinkles around your eyes more. I sent you flowers. Forgive me. I sent you flowers. I bought plant food. Forgive me. It fell and spilled. I'm going to close with a short poem, which was written a few years ago, as you will recognize from the fact that it mentions Cambridge Analytica. Maybe some of you still remember what that was. This is called On Facebook. On Facebook, cats have been de-emphasized. We only see them from our closest friends. You think they swarm you, but you'd be surprised. On Facebook, cats have been de-emphasized. The bots climb trends. Cambridge has analyzed our timelines dry. Here come the flaming hands. Where are the cats? They've been de-emphasized. Oh, let me see them. Let them be my friends. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille, Anton. Thank you so much. Wonderful reading tonight with Claudia Serea, Arthur Russell, J Trause, Anton, Yakovlev, and the Red Wheelbarrow Poets. Thank you so much. Carlos Williams will be proud. So I'm going to hand the mic over to my co-host, Cassandra Atherton, who's going to escort us through the open mic portion of our reading tonight.
Absolutely, we've got a cracker, but it's going to be hard to follow because that's one of my favorite readings. You are all amazing. I love to go away from Lit Balm thinking about everything that people have read and how it might affect my own practice. So thank you. Thank you for your generosity and for coming along. And I thought we'd start with, of course, the quirky and wonderful mind of Mr. John Westick. So John, hit us up in the open.
When he walks into an empty room, loneliness says it needs a little time to itself. Panhandlers cross the street to avoid him. He asks employers about their marital status, files harassment complaints against HR, and leaves car salesmen waiting while he talks to his superior. When he goes to the dentist, the drill needs Novocaine. Cranberries take him with a spoon of sugar. Telemarketers hang up when he answers the phone. COVID gets vaccinated against him. He is the most antisocial man in the world. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer arrogant bastard ale. Stay bitter, my friends.
That was brilliant. I absolutely love the personification of loneliness. I felt a bit sad for him. I like your beer. What was your beer called again?
Arrogant bastard ale.
Who doesn't want an arrogant bastard ale? I think.
Stone Brewing out of San Diego.
Okay, I'll have to order some online. Thank you. Thank you for being amazing. And next we have our favorite master of wordplay, DeWitt, coming from his high back chair. DeWitt. DeWitt, we'd love your poem if we could hear it. You're on mute. Start again.
A friend once told me that if you tell a dream, you lose a reader. This is called Forces of Nature. I was on a trip away from my family in Boston, my wife, my daughter, my son, to serve as a staff member for a writers' conference in the Sierras near Lake Tahoe. So I'd been on trips before, trips of body and of mind. I'd never been so distant from my family and my teaching job before. I was 52. Back home at this time, close friends of my wife were living a family tragedy. Their youngest child, who was my son's best friend, had been fighting liver cancer for 3 years, and now the cancer had metastasized. I just heard this news from my wife by phone. That same afternoon, the afternoon before my dream, I'd been talking about my son to a young woman writer from Los Angeles who had been adopted and who was part Korean and part Jewish. Come evening, 100 or so of us gathered to hear a talk by a dream expert, one Naomi Eppel, whose hocus pocus talk about writing, dreams, and the subconscious I thought silly. As I walked back to my staff cottage, I vowed not to dream. Of course, I did dream, this dream. And yes, I honor it on waking. I write it down. In my dream, I'm 9 years younger, and I don't live in Boston, but rather in a valley that's ringed by picturesque foothills and peaks and has been cultivated by damming a river, so that at one mouth of the valley, there is an imposing concrete dam, not quite as imposing as Hoover Dam, but imposing nevertheless. The dam has long spillways, a concrete span, floodgates, high-tension wires, and so forth. And behind the dam has risen a huge recreational lake that stretches for 20 miles. The mountain valley is populated by privileged white families, including mine, and also by poor families of many races, which I'm aware of as a fact, but not aware of as an uncomfortable one, any more than I'm aware of the water gathered in the lake as a uncomfortable fact. Otherwise, I am what I am in my waking life, a tenured college lit teacher getting by. As in my waking life, my wife and I have 2 children, but in my dream, they're younger. My birth daughter is 8 years old, and my adopted Korean son is an infant, just as he was when he arrived in our home. Our decision to adopt followed several years of trying, years of trial centered on me and my grief at being infertile, and on my reluctance to take on the responsibility of an additional child, but years also of mounting pressures from my wife. In my dream, my daughter does not figure. Because of my privileged position in the valley, I hear that the dam is about to break, that the valley will be flooded. I hear this in time to gather my wife and son and drive to higher ground. So that when disaster comes, when the dam does in fact break and the tidal wave floods the valley, sweeping all lives before it, we're safe. Afterward, we're able to return to our house to resume our lives. In my dream, the poor people, on the contrary, many of whom are Korean, have lost everything, all their children. They've had no warning. The water has descended upon them like a biblical curse. Word spreads among these survivors that I have a son who is Korean. Not only do I carry on my privileged life in the face of catastrophe, my house modest yet comfortable, my grass green, my color television and lights beaming, my cupboard well stocked, but my son is one of theirs. This becomes a cause reported by the media. There are slogans, placards, chants. I'm horrified that our private lives have been transformed into images, symbols. The poor people organize in our house surrounding it like the very waters we have escaped. They cry out for justice. Why should my son, one of theirs, remain with me? I try to explain, am shouted down. They're pressing in on us, threatening to take my son from me. The dream, as dreams do, fills me with emotion, with guilt, my inability to explain, to reason with their calls for justice, to escape with our lives and with my son. I am weeping, powerless, misunderstood, and futile. I wake to my life where there is no valley, no dam, no catastrophe, but where there is guilt, always, and where I will never, ever take the blessing of my son for granted.
Oh, wow. Okay, he's a class act. He's choked me up more than a few times with his creative nonfiction pieces, and that was absolutely gorgeous and incredibly moving. Thank you, DeWitt. It wouldn't be an open mic without something brilliant by you. Next, we had the man who made it all happen. Ron is here. Ron is the poet who put the amazing Red Wheelbarrow Poets on my Australian radar, and he has agreed to read. So Ron, what have you got for us?
Thank you. I want to say that it was a great reading by 4 terrific poets, and I'll hear them again pretty soon in the Red Wheelbarrow monthly meeting next month. I just want to mention I was the featured poet in last year's Red Wheelbarrow, number 15. So I hope I can live up to that. This poem was actually published as 3 separate poems in Shot Glass Journal. I put them all together as one poem for the New Generation Beat anthology that came out this year. It's called Jazzed Faces. Jazzed faces, weary psyches, smells of coffee and pre-dawn America, sallow moon waiting for us. Snake eyes, dog breath, here in a night of pals and gals in this cannabis home. On the beach, laying surreptitiously with silicon dreams, silicon hopes for a new day of perfect lust, perfect love. Breast of fortune, womb divine, brain of wonder, woman thou art, God's gift to man. Quick snatched phrases from mouths of poets, walking to and fro on city streets where we all live and sometimes die. Howls of thunder, howls of laughter, and Ginsberg tears, wrapped in a neat bundle, amid fears and whispers under the Christmas tree. Sunlight streaming, anodynes screaming, filling the void inside our minds with capsicum and Buddha. Screaming sunlight, actionable moonlight, soothes our fears as escaping sounds eat our ears. And that's it. And thank you for everything. Bye-bye.
Amazing. You more than lived up to your title in Red Wheelbarrow 15. So thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Next, we have Leslie. Leslie is back and we're delighted to have her read for us. Leslie.
So I came back to hear this incredible group of people reading, and it was very exciting. And actually, Claudia, so what I'm going to read is called Lamas Sukkot, both harvest festivals. And it feels very connected to Claudia's poem about tomatoes, what happened before and unseen. So Lamas Sukkot, before the wind, before the farmer sows, before she breaks the ground, she thinks about the horse, she thinks about her oats, the hay, the colt, her dry mane in the browned pasture, dried by the yellow wind, about wanting to roll, tell, tangle ourselves with the straw, with a child, with what is mown before it is mowed, with what is planted before it is reaped, with ground before we dropped in the seed.
Thank you. What an amazing last line. I love the way that all culminated in the seed at the end. Thank you. Leslie, come back anytime. We love you here, as you know. Yeah. Awesome.
Sorry, I love being here. I turned off the wrong button.
All good. All good. The superb Karen. We love her poetry at Lit Balm. Karen, you are up next with something delightful, I'm sure.
That was, everything's been great so far. What a wonderful reading, everyone. This has been Climate Week, another yearly attempt that we all recognize what's happening, which I think we do, and trying to do something about it, get governments to do something, etc. So I'm going to read from my 2018 book, The Elephants Are Asking, which deals with that subject. And this is the title poem, and it's also the first line of the poem. The elephants are asking, and the bees and the bats, the prairie dogs, the lemurs, the dolphins, 1 in 6 species, asking, and the coral reefs, the rivers and oceans, the islands and shorelines, asking, and the aspen, the redwood, sequoia, the boreal, the rainforests, asking, and the baby toes wiggling free in spring and summer, and the baby plump arms, fat cheeks, trusting eyes, asking, asking, even God is asking. That's it.
Wow. I loved the anaphora in that of the asking, but it turns it back on ourselves to ask, what are we asking? So thank you, Karen. Next up, we have newbie Barbara. So I would love to hear what you've got for us, Barbara.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I participate in the Red Wheelbarrow and won't go with everything, but you can check my website, ournaturematters.net. I'm going to read something that is unpublished as of right now, and it's in honor of our super blue moon. Uncommon accident. I am an uncommon accident. My name is Moon. My body is pitted and poked, carved out of granite. I tumbled off the cliff in a gunquit. On marginal way, gulls watched, feathers smoothed back by the wind, beaks poked holes in the mist. I am an uncommon accident. My name is Luna. My mind swirls and dances when I fill it with salt from crashed waves after they have washed over the rocks and cliffs. They add spice to my pirouettes and pliés. I am an uncommon accident. My name is Halo. Sunbeams wrap around my orbit. I glow with an iridescent crown. I reign beneath the stars and planets. I am Phoebe, an uncommon accident, born of 4 and 1. Oh, some of 4 and 1. I stand tall with my wax and wane. My wings flutter in the wind. I am blue when the astronomical clock allows me to appear twice in a month.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love the strength of the line. My body is carved out of granite. That's one of my favorites. So thank you for sharing. And yeah, please come back and read anytime. We'd love to have
Thank you for having me.
Always. Next, we have our final duo. We love them. Cindy, badass Cindy, who's been speaking Russian, I think, today on the chat. That leaves me confounded. So Cindy, you owe me some translation. And I don't know what you're going to read for us today from Badass Brooklyn.
Well, first, because we're sort of celebrating New Jersey poets, I'm going to give a shout out to Bruce Springsteen, who turned 74 today.
Oh, wow.
Hey, Bruce. And as far as trying to impress Anton and everyone else with my Russian, I'll say, Я люблю Krasnaya Tachka, which I think means either I love the red wheelbarrows or I hate your mother. I don't know which one. My poem, I'm sure John Trause has heard it a million times. It's very silly. It's very short. It's got 2 parts. It's called 2 More Ways of Looking at a Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow. No, wait, it's the blue one that everything depends on. That was part 1. Part 2. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, but only if you're a dead pediatrician who wrote a 5-volume poem about Patterson. That's it.
Love it. So thematic. Beautiful. Hey, how do I say cheers in Russian? Because I like a drink and I wouldn't mind having something extra in my vocab.
Cheers. Well, to your health. Is not study.
Say it again.
Na zdrowie.
Yay. All right. I'm using that at my next drinking session, which well could be this evening. Awesome. Cindy, you are fabulous. And finally, we have the one and only Bob, who has a pretty devastating manuscript he's put together that I've been lucky enough to read. And he may share one of those poems, he may not. He may do whatever he wants because he's Bob and he's in his kitchen and he can do what he feels like. Bob.
Okay, this is an information piece. Information. She did not know if her story should be classified as true crime or romance or natural science. She did not know if the title should be printed in red ink or blue. She did not know if there would ever be a sequel. She did not know if anyone would ever read it out loud.
Amazing. Luckily, you read it out loud for her, Bob, and his many genres. Thank you so much. I always take those little snippets away with me for the day and think about them at odd times. So when I'm having a drink, I'll be thinking about Bob. So, Mark, that's the best way to end.
Oh, yes, certainly. With a bit of information from Bob, that's always the best way to end. But tonight, thank you, you wonderful features from the Wheelbarrow Poets in New Jersey, Claudia Serea, John Trause, Anton, Yakovlev, and Arthur Russell. Thank you so much. And actually on October 7, we have Susanna Case, Myra Malikin, and Hilary Sideri. And October 14, we have Claudia Keelan, Jeffrey Cyphers Wright, Terence Winch, Kyle Harvey, and Annabelle Lee. So join us for those shows. So there's lots of shows coming up. We're actually kind of fully booked all the way through March. So we are not disappearing by any means. And so to end today, in the spirit of the Holy of Holies, this is a poem called A Sparrow's Salt Prayer, in 3/4 time, to be sung at 8,000 hertz at 2,600 feet. Forgive us our circumnavigations as we forgive those who shore upon us. Lead us not into the methane maelstrom, but deliver us from the grip of carbon dioxide. Lead us toward the seeds into an ocean of wildflowers. Lead us down to the salt licks, the pine cones, and skyward to your bedazzling array of sunshine, rainfall, and cloudwork. And above all, let us not forget we begin where we enter the murmurations, and with some auspiciousness may we vanish where once we suddenly emerged. Thank you all for a wonderful night. Please join us next time, and lots of love and poetry and big hugs. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. This was great. I hope to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra and Mark and everyone for sharing your poems.
Yeah, this was great.
It was terrific.
Great hearing you
Lovely
all.
to be here.
Have a good night.